In this breakout session, Paul Reimer, the Executive Director of the Ames Center for Math and Science in Fresno, California, will share ideas and strategies for providing engaging professional development through a virtual platform. So, if you're ready to put some zing in your Zoom, let's welcome Paul.
Hello, welcome to our breakout session, Put Some Zing in Your Zoom, making the most of online PD. My name is Paul Reimer with the Ames Center for Math and Science Education.
Hi, I'm Brooke, and I am a PK-12 coordinator for Ames.
And I'm Bev Ford, and I am a PK-12 coordinator as well.
So again, thanks for joining us today during the Early Math Symposium for this breakout session. We're just thrilled to be able to share with you today a bit about some of our experiences and some of what we think could really be helpful for early childhood mathematics education going forward. So as you know, we're from the Ames Center for Math and Science Education in Fresno, California. Ames has been around since the 1980s as a nonprofit center that's working towards an equitable world through math and science education. Our work at Ames really revolves around designing and studying innovative approaches, materials, and resources to engage teachers and learners in playful and meaningful mathematics and science education. And the main thrust of our work is to provide educators with opportunities as learners themselves. We firmly believe that educators need to experience the kind of learning that they hope to engage their students and children and families in their communities in. And so our work really looks at ways to engage teachers as learners, to engage educators in ways of thinking about their own learning processes, and then to use insights into thinking about the pedagogical practices that they take up with children. So a lot of what we do is we engage teachers as learners and provide opportunities to reflect on those experiences. And our work that we'd like to share today is centered around mathematics and science education. And in particular, we're committed to opportunities for interdisciplinary engagement that are afforded by STEM education in early childhood settings. And our work really takes an equity lens as well. And as we heard in the keynote, to thinking about learners and thinking about asset views of students from across a variety of contexts and populations, it's important for us to acknowledge today from an equity lens the idea around who participates in mathematics and science. And even as Carolyn encouraged us to think about in the introduction this morning so well, that we're all capable mathematics learners, we're all capable mathematicians and scientists. But to really think about what that means is to acknowledge that young children are capable of sophisticated thinking in mathematics and science. But we also know too that there have been certain activities and spaces and contexts that have been privileged as places where STEM occurs, where science and mathematics occur. And we want to really interrupt some of those narratives and to think more broadly about where STEM takes place, who participates in it, and what it looks like. And so that means that we take up opportunities to look for naturally occurring experiences that can be harnessed as learning opportunities in mathematics and science. In today's day and age, it's especially important to think about spaces outside of classrooms, outside of school contexts, where children now are spending more time in home and in community. And so thinking about how we leverage those kinds of activities for learning is the thrust of our work. And in particular, we've been looking at young children and looking at the early childhood context. And we know that young children, while they are capable of sophisticated mathematical thinking, also benefit from expert adult guidance and ways of interacting with others who can support their developing thinking. So our work has really focused around how do we think together about the ways that adults can interact with children to support meaningful learning experiences. And this speaks to the need for high quality professional learning for educators that's focused on how children develop mathematics thinking and scientific thinking and understanding, and then the ways in which adults can best support them. So our work then has taken a particular lens. Our approach is based on best practices in professional development, on design-based implementation research that really looks at how research and practice can be mutually informing, and then also on coaching and implementation strategies to support long-term sustainable growth. So our approach has been to provide opportunities for collaborative design from the beginning. As we work with educators and as we think about partnering with schools, teachers, we want to together identify and define partnership goals, strategies, and deliverables that are based around trust and respect and ongoing reciprocity. In addition, our lens of professional development and professional learning is that educators are first positioned as learners through active and playful opportunities to deepen their content understanding and to learn through engagement and reflection. And we find that this also takes opportunities for educators to consider their own identities as mathematics learners first, and then as mathematics teachers second. And this is an important part of the of teachers developing their own agency and becoming instructional leaders in the settings in which they work. And then thirdly, we focus on implementation and sustainability through face-to-face coaching, through video clubs, pedagogical conversations, and really through the development of a community of practice that can support capacity to implement, to scale, then to sustain growth both in individuals and collectively. And we've had fantastic opportunity to really take these guiding principles and this lens into some practical work with educators across the state through the California Early Mathematics Initiative. And through this initiative, we've been able to work with 30 organizations, some of which are schools, school districts, nonprofits, home-based childcare centers, to really think together about the kinds of experiences that we can bring to young children and families in our communities, and how we can begin to think about coherent approach to early mathematics education across the state. This picture is an example of the kind of work that we engage in with educators. It's hands-on, it's collaborative, it's interactive, and we're constructing understanding together. And so providing this sort of effective professional development has become even more challenging given the current pandemic and situations that we're facing as we go back to reopening schools. As you notice, the educators in this picture are not properly social distanced, they're not wearing masks, and there are way too many of them in this room. So although there are aspects of this work that we intend to continue, we also have to think about ways that we can adapt, that we can rely on the best practices we've learned, but also look for new opportunities. And online professional learning for educators has become forefront and center on many of our minds. But participants in these sessions are not always engaged in meaningful, active learning. And we face challenges that are not unique. We face challenges that are not new, but they are front and center as we think about ways to engage educators and families in effective and authentic professional learning in mathematics and in science during this current climate. So we want to hear from you about some of the challenges that you are facing, either as a participant in professional learning or a facilitator of professional learning, some of those challenges that you've been facing. And so we're introducing today a collaborative Padlet. And in a web browser, if you're able to open up the link that's on our slideshow here, which is it's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/Ames Padlet. This will take you to a Padlet where you'll be able to enter in some of your own thoughts and ideas regarding some of the challenges that you've been facing. You'll also be able to think and add some thoughts around some of what your strategies and approaches have been in addressing these challenges. We'd love to hear if you've got ways that you've been interacting both in professional learning or even with students or children in this day and age today. And then thirdly, what are some opportunities that have been presented by the new challenge, by these challenges that you may be facing? Rather than only thinking of challenges, we also want to turn the dial a bit to think about what new opportunities are able to be provided through leveraging technology in new ways for learning. So I see that already a lot of you are on the Padlet, you're adding some ideas, and that's fantastic. Keeping participants engaged is challenging. Teachers are overwhelmed and exhausted. This is a very key point. And staying actively engaged with the content. So fantastic. And fatigue, Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. So thank you for already posting a bunch of those ideas. And we encourage you to continue to do that throughout the session and even beyond, as we're able to share together some of the thoughts and ideas that we have. We've got some of our own challenges that we'd like to address today, and I hope that they resonate with you and that you find some insight and are able to draw some practical applications into your own work from the ways in which we've discussed these challenges today. So 3 challenges today that we want to highlight. The first is that the challenges of design. There's a challenge that we face in blended in-person and remote learning designs. The challenge really becomes clear when we try to maintain consistency and coherence between these experiences. How do we thoughtfully consider opportunities for extended learning at home? And how do we then also leverage those experiences at home during the times when we are face-to-face, or if there's a blended opportunity for that? So designing for professional learning and designing for authentic engagement is a challenge. The second challenge that we want to talk about today is the challenges of resources. The question becomes, what's readily available? What is readily available in our schools, but also what is readily available in our homes and in our communities? What technology affordances or constraints are families dealing with? And then really, how can we leverage home resources as assets for learning? This creates an opportunity for us to think about culturally relevant and culturally embedded practices in math and science that can make use of everyday activities in homes and everyday resources that children and families may encounter. So it's an opportunity really to bridge home and school by embracing these unique, culturally dependent ways of knowing that families can engage in. And then finally, we face the challenge of meeting individual learners' needs. And this applies to teachers as learners, developing new understanding of the content that they teach, as well as pedagogical strategies to better reach children. As we've seen and as we know, teachers have various experiences, comfort with, and confidence in teaching mathematics. But this also applies to children as learners. How do we maintain attention to the unique challenges, the barriers, but also the assets and the strengths that children possess and face? And how do we ensure support for dual language learners and for children with disabilities across various contexts and populations? As part of our work with the Early Mathematics Initiative, we have engaged in community of practice meetings with blended in-person and remote participation. And as you see here in this slide, we have some folks who are in face-to-face, other folks who joined remotely. And this gave us an opportunity to think a little bit about how we begin to address some of these ideas. We had the fortunate experience of being able to start with this last fall to begin thinking about ways to do this, and then spent the year through 4 community of practice sessions engaging educators across the state in blended experiences. So to address some of the challenges that were just posed, as well as to really stay true to some of our guiding principles around how we want to design and engage for professional learning, we've been using video conferencing technology paired with tangible materials to engage remote online early childhood educators in professional development and early mathematics education. So as you see here, this is an example that we'll talk a little bit more about later, but it's a way that we've engaged participants across the state in thinking about authentic learning, authentic engagement in constructing mathematical understanding, and in this case, a geometry experiment, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So today we want to really highlight several examples and focus how we focused our work around virtual professional development that really is attuned to 4 guiding principles. The first guiding principle relates to environment. We suggest today that it is crucial to create a safe collaborative environment for online presence. We're going to talk a little bit about how this is accomplished and ways in which we can think more about it together. The second is to provide options for engagement. Just as in face-to-face experiences, there are options and ways that we acknowledge that learning is multimodal and that it requires a variety of different embodied experiences, but also thoughtful reflection. We want to provide options in the ways that people engage, not only with the content, but in the tools and in using those things as well. Third, activity. We want to think about how do we stay active and how do we virtualize in-person activities? And then finally, fourth, what tools can we use for collaboration? We know that there are a variety of different kinds of tools, and we want to think about how do we harness those tools, both high-tech and low-tech, for engaged learning. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bev, who is going to be talking about a first story, and then Brooke will follow with a second story of how we've been able to put these principles into practice and what we're learning together about how to effectively facilitate learning-centered virtual professional development. So, Bev?
Hi. So I am really excited to be here to share just an idea that we have tried where we reimagined something that many of you have already done, a shape hunt. It was really important to us that we rethink the way we do virtual PLs because Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And we're all on a lot of Zooms, and we wanted to stay true to what we really believed about learning, which is that it is active and hands-on, and we learn through our experience. And sometimes as adults, we treat children different than we treat ourselves in PLs. And so we had a lot of fun trying to think about what resources people might have. And today, I'm going to talk to you about the shape hunt. It was also really important for us to think about what technology people might have experience around and recognize that just like in a classroom, we have to differentiate for adults. Not all adults have the same technological abilities, and they don't all have the same tools. And I know that I have gained so much experience and expertise, certainly not a full expert, but as I've had all these different tools that people were using in my coaching sessions. So we want to just make sure that there was a safe environment, that it felt collaborative, that we could laugh as we learned, and we were including everyone. So you can see that we're reimagining an activity called the shape hunt. I remember teaching when I started teaching over a decade ago that I would do shape hunts with my students, and depending on the age, we would look for different shapes in our environment. So we wanted to do this because we wanted to create a space for the adults to reprocess something that they had already done. Often in this pandemic, we just have to kind of rethink the tools that we're using with that same activity. We also wanted to create a space for them to practice those technological tools. We have to practice too, and we need to make sure that we're comfortable and we have fumbled through, and been able to use the tools so that when we're working with kids or we're working with adults, that we're really focused on who's in the room and the people that we're interacting with. So you see a picture on the screen, and this is an example of one that one of the participants that I worked with shared. So what do you think that it is? I'll give you a minute to think about that. So on the next slide, you'll see that the picture is actually coffee. Did anyone think that it was coffee? One of the things that was really fun through this example was I learned that one of the participants I worked with has family members that were artists. And there was actually some conversation about how people were really vying for this piece of art. We talked about our common love of coffee and the beautiful circles and different shapes that you can see within this picture. In this activity, we wanted to focus on two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes and spatial awareness. So we also wanted to give them practice using different technological tools that were relevant for where they wanted to go. So for example, we had people share a second screen, possibly connecting an iPhone or an iPad. We had them email or text images that they found to me, and then I would share my screen. We also had them upload pictures into drawing software and share their screen. So now we're going to watch a video of one of the discussions that I had during our shape hunt.
One. So this was a fun shape to see.
Circle.
So what shapes do you see there?
Oh, triangles. I took it because of the circle, but then I can see a triangle.
Right. Isn't it funny how on a wheel, at first you're thinking it's just the wheel that you're noticing, but when you look at the picture, you start to see details that you didn't see before?
Exactly.
Because I see those triangles. How many triangles are there?
5.
5.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't that be fun if you had like some kind of drawing software where you could trace them? Another option that I did in one classroom is I printed the pictures and then put them in in plastic sleeves, like the sheet protectors.
Mm-hmm.
So we printed them like 8 by 10 and we put them in the sheet protectors, and then they used expo markers on top and highlighted the different shapes that they saw.
So you can see from the video that the participants were able to see different things as they took a picture. So the participant had actually taken a picture of the circle and then realized the triangles inside the wheel. And that happened again and again throughout the different pictures that people shared. We would always share a picture and just ask, what do you see? And it was fun to see the different things that people would see, not necessarily what we always planned on seeing. So you have on the screen 4 examples of pictures that were shared. So maybe it was the circle of a screw that you just don't normally pay attention to when you think about a light switch, or that beautiful hexagon that was a piece of furniture. On the top left, you'll see the map. We learned that one of our participants loves collecting both 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional maps. And whenever they travel, they get a new map. So it was fun to connect relationally. And one of the things that I noticed in the Padlet was that Lizette was asking about developing community virtually. And I have to admit, I am an in-person person. This has definitely been a real challenge for me to feel connected. But what I found through this grant was that you can connect virtually. It doesn't feel exactly the same, but the more you find out about each other and are relational, the more you can develop that community in a virtual space. So there were lots of teachable moments when we did this activity. And they were not ones that you could plan for. On the screen, you see two pictures. One is an example of one of the participants just happened to put the image in a drawing software. And that's what kind of led to the discussion that you saw on the video, where we talked about the different ways that kids could potentially go and use their parents' phone to take pictures and then draw on those pictures the different shapes that they saw in a drawing software. The second picture was an example that's been zoomed in. The participant had actually taken a picture of a wedding photo, and all the bridesmaids were holding those pinwheels. And we started talking about making pinwheels and the mathematics in that, and how that could be another asset that that participant had for her to use with both teachers and students. Sometimes we don't realize the things in our everyday world that actually can be used within education. And so one of the most exciting things for me has been coming alongside people and helping them to reimagine their spaces and their places and the knowledge that they have that they can use with the teachers and the students that they work with. Now, the hard part is it's not the same for everyone. So we all really have to pay attention to who's in the room. And one of the things that I really appreciate is just being sensitive to the fact that we can use lots of different tools and ways to engage. And just like we differentiate for students, at the AIM Center, we like to differentiate for the adult learner as well, because it allows everyone to come to the table and to be able to grow in their knowledge and have access. So today, we talked about some teachable, we talked about how we used a safe and collaborative and inclusive environment for an online presence. And we did that through engaging relationally, and we did that through giving them different ways to engage in the activity, whether they used an iPad, whether they emailed or text. Some other things that we did is we allowed people to either use the chat or the microphone, and honored both ways of interacting so that people could do what was comfortable for them. We need to feel comfortable in that learning environment in order to fully engage. And we also recorded sessions so that if people just weren't comfortable going on the video chat or calling in, they could watch it later. And then, like I said, we did both video chat and calling in. We have to really be sensitive to the fact and not make assumptions about what resources people have, and allow everyone to have the space to be able to continue to grow professionally. So I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Brooke, who's going to share another story about how we address the challenges that we were noticing.
Okay, so really excited to share about another activity that we did once we had to kind of go virtual, and wanted to still create some staying active activities that we could do and still connect from a distance. So we're going to use this tangram activity to look at the third and the fourth guiding principle that we were kind of committed to as we started to engage in the early math initiative. So the first thing that we tried to think about is just think of an activity that we would normally do if we were in person, and then just try to think of a way that we could virtualize that activity. And so we'll look at some ways we did that, and then also just tools that we would use to create collaboration, because another thing that we wanted to make sure that we tried to do was make sure that people could still collaborate with each other, that we could collaborate with our participants, and not lose that part that we love so much about being together in person. So one thing that we learned kind of early on, maybe by a couple mistakes, maybe not, is how important it is to communicate early with our participants, especially if we're going to be doing something that we're going to create something, or there's materials that they need to bring. So we would make sure that we gave them ample time to gather those materials. And we also try to choose materials that were common household items that would allow them to just kind of go around their home, gather what they needed, be able to come together and work with us. We did at one point want to do an activity where our participants might not have had the materials, and so we actually sent them out to there. So some of this early planning, early communication is really important. Okay, so we're going to watch a video, and it's going to just show you a few of the things that we did to try to help our participants be able to make this tangram with us and not feel lost.
So the next step then is to make a square, and to do this, we'll just use this method of making a diagonal fold. That edge, opposite side there. If you have a pencil, it's kind of handy just to draw a line down this edge. If not, you can just make another fold to mark that. Then when you open that up, if we cut and just make one large square. And tell you what, when you have your square, why don't you hold it up in front of your camera? And when I see a whole bunch of squares, we'll move on. All right. So square, square, square. Okay, waiting for just a couple more. I'm also getting a kick out of looking at all your different cereal brands. We got some Frosted Flakes. We got some Chex.
Okay, so that was my colleague Scott Nielsen, and he was working with the group. And some of the things to highlight from that video, we did have photos that would kind of just show the different steps that they needed to take as they were tracing and cutting up their tangram. But then we also connected with a second device. You could use a phone, you could use an iPad, and we used that as like a dot cam. And that was really helpful, especially if we needed to pause because someone was maybe having trouble with figuring out exactly the fold that they were trying to make, or maybe they were getting a little lost. It was really helpful to be able to kind of actually in the moment show them through that dot cam. And then lastly, you'll notice that Scott really used their video as well to get feedback so that we wouldn't kind of lose them along the way and make sure that everybody was being able to follow along. So those were some of the things that we utilized to keep that collaboration going as we were working virtually. So we didn't just want to make some tangrams because of course the funnest part is play. And that's what we're all about at AIMS, is staying playful, staying fun. So we would do some puzzles together after we made the tangrams. And to keep that collaboration going and connect with our participants as well as keeping them collaborating with each other, we would use the chat feature. Some people really like to type in their reflections or their questions and things like that. Some people were comfortable kind of muting, unmuting, and they would communicate and collaborate that way. One really cool thing is allowing them to do a screen share where they would actually show their puzzles or designs. And then lastly, we would use like a Padlet, similar to what you all are engaging in today. So the next type of activity we would do is, can you make a boat? And this was kind of the start of a progression. Another thing that we would try to do as we engaged in these online learnings was give them things that they could actually do with students as well. So they were engaging in activities that would be directly related to the sorry, Paul, could you go back one slide for me?
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so the first one that we would do is just kind of create and play, and the kids would, and our participants would get to kind of use their imagination. And this is the start of a progression where it would get a little more challenging in every step we took. So go ahead and go to the next one now. Okay, so in this one, you'll notice that it's kind of like a puzzle, but they can see the shapes inside of the boats. So we would give some like this, which are maybe a little more challenging than just creating your own idea, creating your own boat, however you would like. So this is a specific one, but it does give you hints by giving the shapes inside. And the next step forward would be a puzzle like this one, where they're trying to build this using their tangram shapes, but you can't see the shapes inside. And so the lines inside are missing, and you kind of just have to figure out what's going to go together to put this shape. And so this progression was shown in the activities we did with the participants, but they could actually go and work with students and work through this progression of more to more challenging types of puzzles for students as well, as they noticed through their play what they were ready for. Okay, so through this, we kind of just looked at 2 of the guiding principles, thinking about staying really active. We're really committed to the idea that we learn through doing, and so we wanted to find ways to virtualize something that we might do in person anyway, just fun things that would keep us engaged, but we'd also learn together. And the important thing about that part was remembering to communicate very early. There's a lot of prep that goes into before you have the actual event, and giving them time to gather the things that they might need. And then using tools for collaboration. Some of the things we did is we used multiple ways to demonstrate the activity. So we used photos, we used a second device as a dot cam. We allowed them to collaborate with us and with each other using things like the chat feature or sharing their screen to share what they created. And then lastly, the Padlet turned out to be a really great way to reflect together and have them communicate and collaborate and respond to each other. So we were really committed to an active, collaborative environment. And so we kind of learned about the tools we had available to us so that we could create that, even though we were in an online environment.
Great. Thank you so much, Bev. Thank you, Brooke, for highlighting the examples of how we can see these guiding principles come to life in the work that we've been able to do. And I think a great point is that we're continuing to learn how to effectively engage. And part of the collaborative design that we do is that we continually receive feedback from learners. And just as a responsive teacher in a classroom would do in terms of adapting and being flexible in response to what the teacher sees from learners, we in our settings with adult learners want to do the same and be reflective and thoughtful, and to really be adaptive in the ways that we engage together around our professional learning opportunities. So to just highlight these 4 guiding principles again, the environment is important to create a safe, collaborative, inclusive environment for online presence. And this is an opportunity for us to bring who we are as people into the professional learning setting. And oftentimes it feels, when you're in front of a camera or you're engaging in a online or in a virtual session, that it just feels impersonal and there's not a connection. And so providing opportunities for people to feel safe about the ways in which they are known in online presence and in online settings is important. To allow them to bring in artifacts from their own personal experience, as Bev suggested, is an important part of that. And to provide options for engagement and the ways in which people are able to engage with tools, the way they're able to engage, whether it's verbally, whether it's with a camera off and through a chat, or whether it's calling in on a phone, to provide those different options for engagement are important as we acknowledge the variety of learners that we engage with. And then finally, the 3rd and 4th, activity to stay active by virtualizing in-person activities where there's movement, there's getting up out of your chair, there's standing up, there's moving about your house. Go find something in your house that represents a particular shape and bring it back. Those are important ways to really virtualize things that might be in person, such as that tangram activity. And finally, to use tools for collaboration. These could be everyday tools, things like cardboard models. They could also be the tech tools that we use to collaborate and share our ideas around. So So these are the 4 principles that we're working with. We're still learning, we're still engaging in these things, and we invite you to continue to do that with us. So we encourage you to visit our website, aimcenter.org. On our website, we have a variety of different resources that are available that help to extend some of this work. If you're interested in the Tangram activity, I see that in the questions, somebody asked for a copy of these activities, and we have one-page activities that we're developing. We've got a few on the website right now, and you are more than welcome to visit and download and to begin to use those. They're in a resources tab on our website. We also have monthly online virtual learning sessions that are beginning in August, where we are inviting participants to engage with us for 1 hour to do just the kinds of activities that you saw happening in the examples that Bev and Brooke shared. We've got one that is a shape hunt. We've got another that's creating a spinning marker top using commonly found materials. These are free sessions that we're excited to engage in beginning in August. So you can find information about those as well. Our sessions, and I'm going to just take a moment to highlight a few of the questions that were asked. We referenced using a doc cam, that's short for document camera, and what that allows in Zoom, you are able to connect another device like an iPad or an iPhone, and we usually set that on a stand and have it pointing down at the table in front of us. And you're able to see a bit of what's happening with the hands and with the manipulatives and the materials. And today during lunch recess, you'll have a chance to do that with Aileen and Scott, and you'll be able to see a bit more about that. If you have questions about that or how to set that up, we'd be happy to help. Send us an email or shoot us a message. You see our variety of our different tags here. We're at Ames Ed on Facebook and Twitter. We're at Ames Center on Instagram, aimscenter.org. The ages of our activities for these were really all ages for tangrams, but really focusing on early elementary, but then at younger ages, there can be some basic exploration of the simple shapes. And happy to answer any more questions. Thank you so much for having us here today, for joining us for this breakout session. Please be in touch, and we appreciate it. And we were just so happy to be able to share with you today.